Euromed have said yesterday Israeli forces have deliberately targeted 37 aid distribution centres and 28 food banks as part of a systematic and deliberate policy to starve civilians. Now, how we're not leading with that as the topic of discussion rather than the opinions of individuals who felt hurt by factual information is just something that I can't understand.
Okay, and you will know, Daniel, that Israel will deny that they're deliberately starving individuals.
We consistently bring this back to the opinion of the Israeli government. Time and time again, the statements of the Israeli government have been proven to be lies. Most recently, the execution of 15 medical workers.
Earlier this week, I did a video on the Irish band Kneecap and how they had used the Coachella Music Festival to highlight the Holocaust of Palestinians by Israeli terrorists in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. You can watch that video here. Their action had left the supporters of the Israeli terrorism in the West in great deal of discomfort and agony. Sharon Osbourne had even gone to the extent of asking the Donald Trump administration to revoke the work visa for Kneecap so that they could not perform in the US. I mean, we live in a world where demands are made to cancel the visa for the members of a music band just because they oppose the brutal slaughtering of innocent civilians. What was a mistake? They flashed 3 visual but factual messages during their Coachella performances, all highlighting the genocide in Gaza. Now, the manager of the Kneecap band appeared on an Irish radio station called RTE1 this week, and you have to listen to the content of this interview. Daniel Lambert, who is the manager of Kneecap, was asked by the RTE radio's drive time host, Sarah McInerney, if Kneecap members understood why some people were offended by their action. I was shocked by this question on an Irish radio station. I mean, what kind of question is this? Every time it's all about the hurt sentiments of the perpetrators just because they are Jews. I mean, do these Zionists have the birthright to feel hurt even after they brutally kill hundreds of thousands of people for fun? And the fact a radio host in Ireland thinks this should be a legitimate journalistic question defies common sense. Anyway, listen to the question, and more importantly, Daniel Lambert's answer. And don't forget to pay attention to the disgusting line that Israel would deny blah, 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 and how the Kneecap manager responds to this nonsense.
Some people were also offended. Can you understand why some people were offended?
I think that once you move into that space, you're buying into moral hysteria. The real issue here is that somewhere between 50 and 100,000 people have been murdered. 20,000 of them are children. And, if somebody is offended by what were factual images and what was said on the screens, and I'm happy to tell you what was said on the screens, is that Israel is committing a genocide against the people of Palestine. Ireland supports the case that South Africa's taken, so Ireland supports that position. The second thing that was said on the screens was that this genocide has been armed and enabled by the US government. And I don't think that anybody could deny that. So, if somebody's hurt by the truth, that's something for them to be hurt by. But it's really important to speak truth. And thankfully, the lads are not afraid to do that.
Just on the point of genocide, the current legal position is that the International Court of Justice judges have concluded that some of the acts that South Africa have alleged in their case, if proven, would fall under the United Nations Convention on Genocide. Just in terms of the anti-Israel messages that you posted, we have, Daniel, spoken to many people from Israel on this programme who are opposed to what the Israeli government is doing, like Alon Lee Green, who's a high-profile protester in Israel, or Gideon Levy, who's a high-profile columnist, relatives of hostages. There are regular protests in Israel now from some members of the population to stop the war. Are you painting everyone in Israel with the same brush, or do you run that risk?
Absolutely not. No, I think when you refer to Israel and in messaging as we did, that you're referring to the Israeli government, it's impossible to name all of the people. There's so many of Israeli government ministers. I think too, like you've mentioned there in terms of the case, Euromed have said yesterday, and I'll just read this out for you, Israeli forces have deliberately targeted 37 aid distribution centres and 28 food banks as part of a systematic and deliberate policy to starve civilians. Now, how we're not leading with that as the topic of discussion rather than the opinions of individuals who felt hurt by factual information is just something that I can't understand.
Okay, and you will know, Daniel, that Israel will deny that they're deliberately starving individuals, but I take the point that what Euromed has said. Kneecap posted this morning about and I'll quote, hundreds of Zionist threats that they've received, mixed in with what they say are thousands of well wishes. Can you tell me what sort of threats has the band received?
It'd be too severe to tell you on this call and on radio at this time of day, to be honest. You could probably imagine the types of things yourself. But I do think even when you've said there a minute ago, like, the UN Special Rapporteur has spoken, RTE, we consistently bring this back to the opinion of the Israeli government. Time and time again, the statements of the Israeli government have been proven to be lies. Most recently, the execution of 15 medical workers and the burying of them and their ambulances in a shallow grave. It was all lies. And once the information and the video came out, they changed the story. The murder of Sharon, the journalist, the Washington Post, a comprehensive investigation showed she was deliberately targeted by the IDF. At what point here do we stop amplifying messages that are consistently proven to be incomplete and inaccurate? When do we do that?
The whole interview is a must listen for anyone who cares about humanity. This just shows the moral clarity of the Kneecap manager and the band members he manages. Listen to his reply when he was reminded about Sharon Osbourne's call for the revocation of their work visa in the US.
I think that, to the band's massive credit, there's 3 working class young people here who've built a career for themselves on the basis of the Irish language and music and culture and identity. And they have the bravery and the conviction, especially given where they've come from in post-conflict society, to stand up for what's right. And they're willing to do that despite the fact that it may harm their career, despite the fact that it may harm their income. And they should be praised, massively for that. It's an extremely strong position for young people to take, especially young people from a working class background.
Yeah, and on that point about whether it could harm the band's career, I see Kneecap posting today that you've sold out lots of upcoming performances. So on that side, it doesn't seem to have caused you any harm. But some of the performances are, for example, in Boston. And you'll have seen Sharon Osbourne calling for your US visas to be revoked. The Trump administration, we know from the last couple of months, cracking down really hard on anyone who's expressing pro-Palestine views. Do you have any concern you'll have any trouble getting into the US or that your US visas might be revoked?
But again, like we're talking about, like the opinion of Sharon Osbourne, and again, it was said by Miss Albanese on your programme or on a similar programme. Why aren't we talking about the opinion of someone like Omar Bartov, who's an Israeli-American genocide expert who concludes that Israel's committing genocide? Why should we care what Sharon Osbourne thinks? I certainly don't.
No, sorry, it's not really about whether she's right or wrong. I'm just wondering whether you have concerns about getting into the US in future. And aside from Sharon altogether, or Sharon Osbourne altogether, what the Trump administration, they've sent out a very clear message about where they stand on this. And they've done that with their actions on pro-Palestine protesters in the US. So, have you had any indication at all that there may be problems? Are you concerned there may be problems getting back into the US?
Our concern is for the well-being of Palestinian kids and the tens of thousands of Palestinians and millions of Palestinians who now have no home and are being bombed daily. That's where people's concern should lie.
Also, Daniel replied beautifully when he was asked about the 7th of October attacks. Although RT presenter was fair overall, Zionists in the UK and around the world referred to 7th of October attacks as if this is when the world started. They will never talk about what happened before 7th of October and Israeli brutalities against Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories. I'm so glad Daniel presented this aspect so beautifully and robustly.
Some of the charges that have been made against Kneecap since the performance, that the band posted solidarity with Palestine the day after the October 7th attacks. People have been critical of that. And also that you've promoted both Hamas and Hezbollah. Hamas, of course, in its charter talks about the annihilation of Jews. I want to know, did you want to respond to those charges?
No, again, we've openly had Israeli government ministers talk about starving a population, cutting food, cutting water. These are the issues that we should be discussing and not other people's opinions. We constantly say October 7th. The Palestinians have been under a brutal occupation for 77 years. The Office of the UN High Commissioner said last week that since the creation of the State of Israel, violations of international law and a lack of accountability have been the norm rather than the exception. that we can somehow frame things in a narrow window is again nonsensical. These are issues the Palestinians have faced for decades, and Ireland has an obligation to prevent these measures. And us, along with all of our EU counterparts and the rest of the world, are doing nothing.
I bet the BBC wouldn't invite Daniel Lambert because he would simply expose the pro genocide propaganda of this disgraceful British media outlet that you and I fund with our hard earned money called the license fee. What Daniel spoke was common sense. What Kneecap did at Coachella event was common sense. So the question is, why am I praising something which is a common sense? Well, that's a sign of twisted world that we all live in. What should have been a common sense is now being billed as an act of bravery. This is the sign that we are living in a very dangerous time. Thugs and petty criminals are ruling us. People who claim to be civilized are proudly funding the genocide of millions of people. A known Israeli terrorist, now a minister in the Israeli government, Ben Gavir, was invited as a chief guest at Donald Trump's resort at Mar-a-Lago. Far from being ashamed, this terrorist was applauded when he thanked Trump's party members, the Republicans, for approving the Israeli decision to bomb food and aid depots in Gaza. Watch the discomfort of the US State Department spokesperson when she was asked to comment on this.
I wanted to ask about Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir being in America, attending a dinner at President Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, where senior Republican officials were there as well. He said that the U.S. approves bombing food and aid depots in Gaza. Is this true? Is this endorsed by the Trump administration? And where does the United States stand on this?
That was, I believe, one report. It was something that he said on his own that has not been confirmed or discussed or anything that is relevant for me to be able to comment on that. It is, of course, in complete contradiction to the nature of our commitment to getting food aid and assistance. And my goodness, the work over these 100 days for that first ceasefire and to get that aid into that area, it's difficult. But that dynamic, I think, is not something that I certainly am going to expand upon with one report, comments from one individual. But what I will do is reiterate, certainly our commitment to Israel, our commitment to creating a better framework in Gaza, stopping the slaughter, getting aid and food in. That has been a North Star for this administration, for Trump and for Rubio from the beginning, and for, I think, people everywhere for generations. All right.
Aid hasn't
Yes, go
gotten
ahead,
in
Eric.
since.
Can you imagine the kind of poisonous people you may be living with? I mean, these people may be your neighbors or my neighbors in the US, in the UK, or even in Europe. One thing that the Gaza Holocaust has done is that it has unmasked these snakes who you and I thought were civilized humans. At least they are exposed globally, and we are cautious now. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you do think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. Details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.